Hello, everyone, and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host, Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I was planning on reviewing the new Dracula movie that just came out, directed by Luc Besson, but I ended up doing a double feature with Iron Lung and Dracula, and I figured I'd just talk about both in this very informal, non-scripted, minimally edited video, because frankly, I don't have a ton to say about either of these films, but they both seem worth talking about a little bit. I'll start with Iron Lung, because that's the first one I saw. Iron Lung has kind of been making waves recently. If you didn't know, it's directed by Markiplier, who isn't someone I'm very familiar with. Markiplier, Mark Fishback is his real name, but he's a big YouTuber. I think he's got like 40 million subs or something like that. I think he's a gaming YouTuber, but he wrote, directed, produced, and starred in this film, which is an adaptation of a independent horror film, horror game that came out a few years ago, also called Iron Lung. And it's been a huge success story, independently created, independently distributed, which is even more rare. And it's been making a ton of money. It's been super successful. I'm not going to go into that a bunch because any number of other people could talk about that better than I could. I'm just going to talk about the movie. So basically what it is it's a post-apocalyptic universe where all the stars and all the planets in the sky kind of just came crashing down one day in what's known as the Quiet Rapture. And the movie takes place on a blood moon. Basically, a sea of blood covers the entire surface of this moon. I guess there's little pockets where people live because obviously people exist here. Otherwise, there'd be no movie. But basically, Markiplier plays this convict. And the convict is sent down in this one-man submarine. He's basically told, hey, go down there into this blood ocean, do some discovery stuff, come back with some useful information for us, and we will give you your freedom, basically. So pretty much the entire film takes place in this one-man submarine with Markiplier there. He has some communication through the radio, and we get tiny glimpses of the outside world, but really we're in this submarine for 2+ hours, which is kind of crazy considering the video game apparently is only about 1 hour long, but I'll get into that. I was pretty sold on this movie from the get-go, to be honest. The concept alone seemed very interesting, very Lovecraftian, this universe, we don't really know what's going on. There's kind of these unexplained happenings. Of course he goes down in the submarine, he's taking his pictures, and he sees this giant skeleton of a creature that, we don't recognize, basically. So there's the Lovecraft stuff right there. And, it sets the tone really well. It's pretty eerie. It's very atmospheric. He's basically, like I said, he's alone in the submarine, and there's a monotony to what he's doing. He has to adjust the coordinates. He has to take pictures with this big kind of black and white pixel camera sort of thing. That's where a lot of the scares come from, is just seeing what's outside of this submarine through this camera, pretty much, is the only way. And it is monotonous, but there's something almost hypnotic about that monotony. If you've seen Skinamarink, that's kind of sort of a niche horror pull, but it's very atmospheric. It's relying on kind of creepy imagery that's not necessarily creepy on its own, but you can tell it's meant to be, and something about that, like that fear of the unknown, not knowing why something is creepy, makes it even creepier. And that's what you're getting with these photos, at least in my opinion. And like I said, there was kind of this hypnotic quality to the atmosphere that really had me sucked in for probably about 45 minutes. I can't pinpoint an exact moment, like it wasn't like a specific moment that took me out, but the repetition and kind of the length of the film, I say the length of the film, it was about 45 minutes at that point, but it basically just hit a point where it did start to feel boring. And I got to admit, once I hit that point, I was out. I never came back. There are very long stretches where very little happens narratively. You're still doing that same repetitive monotony, but stretched over an hour in the middle of this film. Situation gets a bit more dire. It's one of those films where limited supply of oxygen in the submarine, starts to lose oxygen, starts to go a little bit crazy, that kind of thing. Like, nothing new. As Markiplier gets a little more crazy, the cracks in his acting do start to show. Most of the movie up front is just him saying, like, oh, what the fuck? Oh, fuck this. Like, just gruff convict frustration. Once the movie starts to require a bit more emotional depth and a bit more versatility, I guess you could say, that's kind of where the cracks start to show. And honestly, the story just loses any sort of coherence once you stop knowing what's real and what's in his head, what's a hallucination. It kind of just goes off the rails. Some films can get away with doing that because it handles it in a way that you might not fully understand, but it still keeps you invested, keeps you wanting to know what's real. And to an extent, I wanted to know that, but ultimately, it just lost me. It was incoherent. And by the end of the film, I was just so ready for it to be done. And when it does wrap up, I found the conclusion pretty unsatisfying. Like Lovecraftian horror, so much of it is just that fear of the unknown and not really ever fully understanding what's happening, just knowing there are other creatures out there, other stuff beyond our comprehension. That's part of the fear. And while that is here, it's just too empty, too open, I think, to be satisfying at all. By the end of it, like I said, I was just ready for it to be done. I unfortunately thought this was a bad movie. It has its pockets. That first act or so, I was really sold. But by the end, I don't know. I don't know why it was 2 hours. I could not tell you why this thing was 2 hours. You could cut out probably 30 minutes from this thing. That's like a quarter of it, and it would be more effective. I don't know. It's not a very good movie. I think if you're a big fan of Markiplier's, maybe you'll like it more. I'm not. Whatever. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. But then we get to Dracula, the main event, why I went to the theater that day. And, a Luc Besson movie, Luc Besson is, if you want to do some research, he's not the best guy out there, but he still has some notable films, in the 90s. He did Leon the Professional, he did The Fifth Element, more recently he did Lucy. These are like big hits. And I didn't really see much marketing for this film at all. I think I saw the trailer once, and it wasn't a great trailer, but Luc Besson attached to Dracula, one of the most famous horror stories ever, if not the single most famous horror story ever, and it just wasn't seeing it anywhere, which should have been a red flag. But the movie's fine. It's completely fine. It's an adaptation of Dracula. Is it doing anything new with that? Not really. I've seen, probably 4 or 5 different iterations of the whole Dracula / Nosferatu story at this point in my life. And this one, it hits all the points. It is the Dracula story. I feel like it does cut a few corners with the storytelling. It really throws you into things, which on one hand, as someone who knows this story like the back of my hand, it was kind of cool to oh, we're just going right now. But at the same time, even as someone who knows the story, it really felt like there were key pieces of character development and just stage setting that weren't really there. So that, The other thing is it just doesn't add anything new to set this apart from any of the other numerous notable Dracula films. Like I said, this is a story that's been redone so many times, and there are great versions out there. Like the original Nosferatu from early 20th century is a good one. The most recent Nosferatu by Robert Eggers a few years ago was like, I think I put it as my second favorite movie of the year. Even the Francis Ford Coppola, Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. I'm not a huge fan of that movie, but I at least acknowledge that Coppola's kind of going big style with it, you know? This film, it doesn't do anything to set itself apart. You know, I think there are some hints of Besson doing his French sort of style, you know, but it doesn't work. If anything, I thought those moments were some of the weaker when he is adding his own style to it. There's also just some weird decisions here. Like there's CGI gargoyle servants. I've got nothing on that. It was weird. Don't get it. Don't really know why it was there. I was excited for Caleb Landry Jones playing Dracula. If you're unfamiliar, he's, I don't really know. He hasn't really starred in much, but he's kind of, you know, a pasty, long-haired white dude who's got a weird, creepy edge to him. You can go look up a picture. Maybe you've seen him. I think he's a great actor. And I was like, whoa, that's inspired casting, you know, Caleb Landry Jones in this role. He was fine. I don't know. He was fine. Christoph Waltz played, what's his name? The professor / priest who basically, Van Helsing. He's never called Van Helsing in the movie, but he's Van Helsing. I thought that was good casting, you know, but he's not really in it enough for it to be a standout, like go see it for this sort of thing. And ultimately we kind of just get a flavorless version of the Dracula story. You know, like I said, it's fine. It gets the job done, but I don't know why you would choose this over any of the other notable retellings of this story. I really don't. There's an 100-year-old movie out there that I would recommend over this one. And yeah, whatever. It's fine. It's mediocre. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. So that's it. No cuts, I don't think. We'll see in the edit, but that's going to do it for me. If you like the video, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've seen either Iron Lung, or you're a fan of Markiplier's, or if you've seen the new Dracula, or any of the other Draculas or Nosferatus, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.